Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, folks, Big Paul here today, and I have the one and only Broderick Chavez on my podcast. I've been bothering Broderick for a while to try to get him on to do interviews. I know Broderick is not a fan of social media or doing interviews, but I have been a fan of Broderick for a long time, and I've listened to his work and bought all of his sticky notes and was a member of his site for quite a while. Going back 7, 8 years, I think. I don't know. I don't recall. But if you don't give Broderick a follow, Broderick has a lot of great information. He is a lovable grump. I enjoy Broderick's content, and he's a very sharp guy, a biologist, and has a lot of really interesting and useful information. I think you're going to like this interview. We touched on everything from the history of how PEDs became illegal in the United States, the ties to baseball and the political stuff behind that. We talk about the history of testosterone and PEDs, how they were developed. And we also go into performance enhancement in other sports and training, the effectiveness of training versus PEDs and diet. It's a very interesting conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. We're going to dig into all of it in just 1 second. All right, folks. Big Paul here today with the one and only Broderick Chavez. What's going on, man?
Nice sunny morning. Happy to be here.
So tell me what's going on with the coffee lately, man. I always enjoy your talks on coffee. What's good in the coffee world?
Wow, holy hell, I didn't expect you to start there. Actually there's fucking vast doings in the coffee world. But the short answer is much like training and drugs, like the sort of original and simple is still fucking fantastic. I just finished the last sip of I think what the lingo would be my daily driver, which is a roaster out of Chicago, Intelligentsia. This was Illumination Blend. I'm not sure it's their very best coffee, but I'm a sucker for metaphor, and so first thing in the morning, Illumination Blend. It just seems to work, and I love it. Um, but just to give you an idea of how ridiculous I am with coffee, I literally read botanical journals and genetics journals, and there's lots going on with coffee. There's actually new species of coffee being discovered and a couple being bred. If you haven't read, there's a lot of hubbub about um, decaf coffee and it actually potentially being harmful. The way that the
No, I didn't
mechanistic
hear
way
that.
it's decaffeinated, it could actually be causing some health issues. And so there's a real strong push to breed the actual caffeine out of coffee. And there's some progress. It's interesting. So yeah, coffee is exciting. It's probably the only other thing than sports pharmacopoeia that interests me. So I do keep abreast.
Yeah, I enjoy your coffee talks. So if you had to pick one right now, what's the top of your list?
Define the question, like one roaster or like one product?
One roaster would be
One
your
roaster. God, it depends on the day you ask me because I have in North America I have two favorite roasters that are on opposite sides of the country. In Las Vegas, Vesta Coffee. Um, Probably 4 out of 7 days, I tell you they're my absolute favorite. Go there, never change. The other 3 days, I'd probably say Kookaburra from St. Augustine, Florida.
I've actually had the Cucumera before, and
Bear's amazing. It's really good.
yeah, we
Just
have friends in St. Augustine. It's a neat little
cute.
town.
It's a corny thing for somebody like me to say, but just a cute little location. Just kind of right in the mix. The coffee is magnificent, and you can always tell a good coffee shop by the caliber of the person serving it, and you can ask them questions. What are these beans? Where were they roasted? When were they roasted? Those, and they know, and that's the fucking tell.
Yeah, I've actually been there. It's a neat place. Um, I want to continue a conversation we started before it came on. We were, and this has always been something I've kind of talked about, and usually it stirs up some controversy. But how training is probably the least important thing out of the variables that we consider when we are in bodybuilding or hypertrophy, muscle growth, chasing getting bigger. And I've always found that PEDs and food to be probably the top of the pyramid when it comes to hypertrophy.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I would like put a couple caveats into that. I when you say the least important, um, and we did even speak on this a little bit off camera. I don't necessarily mean that as to say like you don't need to do it. I think training
Right.
is immensely relevant, but the specific variety or all of this nonsensical yammering about optimal. What's optimal? I don't think the people talking about that really understand the width and birth of what that might mean. I think the quote big secret to training is that it is in and of itself coherent. That if you're going to train this hard, then it has to be below a certain volume threshold. If you're going to train this easy, it has to be above a certain volume threshold. Those sorts of things. I think there's a certain equation that needs to be met, but beyond
Right.
that, like this idea that like there's a correct way to train, I literally defy that on every level. One, I'm a biologist. Two, I have no advanced degrees, but my undergraduate degree is in biology. But I spent an awful lot of time around the evolutionary biology, you know, graduate students and really absorbed that. And the secret to the survival of our race has been our width and birth of
Adaptation.
adaptability. We can exist in almost any climate, we can exist on almost any diet, and we can respond to almost any training stimulus. So again, I don't think that there's like a secret way to train. If I had to personally say what's the best way to train, I would more give you a psychological interview than a physiological interview because I think that commitment and buy-in to the style of training is really the thing that gets you over. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. You know what kind of was revelatory to me? I always tended to, when I was younger, tended to gravitate towards the Arthur Jones kind of style of training. That's kind of how I trained when I was younger. Heavy progressive overload, get
Mhm,
in, get it out, get the job done. And then as I got older, I couldn't sustain that because I kept getting hurt.
mhm,
And I had to psychologically, I got married to that style of training, and I had to completely blow it up
mhm,
and go to more of a higher volume,
mhm,
lower intensity,
mhm,
still progressing, and
mhm.
that kind of, I still, and I started to progress again. So ultimately, it came to my belief that it's really just about providing stimulus,
Yeah,
and the rest of the stuff just did the work.
yeah, and it's funny to me how few people know the history. Um, and yes, there's marketing, and yes, there's hyperbole in the middle, but go all the way back to 1972. Um, Former Mr. Olympia at the time, Sergio Oliva, was just absolutely infamous for absurdly voluminous workouts. Like to the point where there were stories of him spending 6 and 8 hours at the gym, and he viewed it as his job. Just trained all goddamn day long, and then went on the payroll for Arthur Jones, worked for Nautilus, trained theoretically in Nautilus, high intensity fashion. So he went from training 6 hours a day to perhaps an hour a week, and was as good or better than he ever was. And then retired, and then made a comeback at 84 and trained voluminous as can be, and each time presented an Olympia caliber physique. Now, it's only one person, but it's pretty indicative of what I've experienced all of my career, all of my life. If you apply a coherent, manageable system, hard, take drugs, eat food, you look like you look.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. And I ultimately what I've kind of found is, like you said, the psychology of it. You have to marry yourself to something that you enjoy.
Yeah.
It keeps you motivated and gets you in the gym. It also needs to be sustainable too. If you're getting beat up and hurt.
But even that is a kind of a unique thing, because there are people, well, again, seemingly obviously, they're just tough. They just seem to be very resistant to some of the negatives. You can point to Ronnie Coleman in his infirmity, but keep in mind, Ronnie Coleman trained like an absolute demon way into his 40s. Most people can't do that, but you can't tell him he was wrong. He was the best in the fucking world.
Yep.
Go over to England. Look at guys like JP. Like, no one can train like that. But him, and it fucking obviously works. He might be the most muscular human being to ever walk the goddamn planet.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
Yeah. So again, it's yes, there must be serendipitous synchronicities. Like, you have to want to train that way. You have to be able to survive training that way. Yeah, of course. And many people like yourself and even myself have to make compromises to get in the right place. But this idea that like there is some secret correct way to optimize, like that's just not a thing. It's just not a thing.
And ultimately, I think a lot of this is, I mean, I want to get your opinion. You're the biologist, but a lot of it's just predetermined by your genetics.
Of course, but also, and interestingly, even the subject of genetics is evolving. Bad pun, but I really didn't mean that. But yeah, even the subject of genetics is evolving at a pretty rapid pace lately. There are genetics, as in the absolute blueprint you're born with. But now we've come to realize that epigenetics and environmental influences, even at early development, can influence the outcome. So yes, it's kind of lumped in the heading of genetics. But if you take two identical twins, raise one at the equator and one at the North Pole, they will actually have slightly different responses through their life to environmental stimuli, simply because minor mechanisms adjust to the local environment.
I've noticed this too, and this is kind of a controversial take, but what I've seen is the guys that tend to get to the top of the bodybuilding pro stage are the guys that started out with the PEDs at a very young age.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and again, you can take your cues from the Eastern Europeans, who were infinitely smarter and further ahead of us in the at least in the beginning. Now, probably not a coincidence that that's where those things started. So they had a head start in many ways, not just in the application, but also in the research and development, aspect. But there's not a lot of controversy around the concept of muscle memory. Like, I think even non-drug using people are pretty comfortable with the idea that there's something that once you accrue an amount of muscle, it's easier to return to that the second time if you detrain for some reason. And there's a slew of complicated biological reasons. Myself, Mike Israel, 10 other people could prattle on about, nuclei and myonuclear donation and satellite cells, and it's not important. The important part is it's pretty well acknowledged that's a real thing. It's also pretty well acknowledged that drugs fucking work. So we've got a situation where if you build muscle, it's easier to return to that state, and we know fucking full well drugs build muscle. So weirdly, were you to combine those two gears into a cog, you build fucking muscle early, and then it's always easier to get back to that stage for the rest of your fucking career. So who knew?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I started training when I was 16 and started dabbling in PEDs not long after. And then I hit my early 30s and, life got a hold of me, career, business, kids, shit. And I took 10 years off from the gym, turned into mashed potatoes. And within a couple of years of returning in my 40s, I was pretty much back, even
Yeah.
exceeding where I was at in
Yeah.
my 20s. It was wild how quick it came back.
Yeah, again, like between just observational, anecdotal evidence, and then the actual science that we know, or at least we know is really a bad term. That's not really how science works. That we're very confident in. Um, people love to talk about science in terms of facts, and the reality is there aren't an awful lot of facts in science. There's just a lot of highly repeatable, highly supportable ideas.
Yeah, and that seems to be the case in biology. And I'm a computer scientist by background, but computer science is a little more absolute. But
Well, yeah, it's a bit more mechanistic, but
yeah,
even then, computer science starts to slide laterally into programming, networking, and even to this new world of AI. And
AI.
it's a dynamic thing that you know we know that we being not me, but like we as a species or a race, like we know the constituents, but we don't necessarily know the whole.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the go down the PED path. I mean, that's
Sure.
that's the stuff that everybody loves, and honestly, that's kind of where I found you years ago. I started listening to your Q and A's, your Sunday morning coffee talks, um, and
And I appreciate that, by the way. Thank you.
yeah, I've listened to you. You pop up on Instagram for years, and I've listened to it, and I've always enjoyed your thoughts on stuff. But what are just basics? If you wanted to put it that way, that where somebody would start off. Let's talk about the basics of PEDs for hypertrophy and performance enhancement.
Um,
Your
wow.
core fundamentals.
Yeah, and I never know where to begin that conversation. It always reminds me of that Richard Feynman interview where he was actually, and I'm not saying that I am, but he was frustrated with the interviewer. I think it was like 60 minutes or something, and he basically spent 4 or 5 minutes just chastising the interviewer for asking a
I love
why
Feynman.
question, and it was he's like his ultimate premise was to ask a why question we have to know where to start. At what level do we agree? And then we can start whying from there. But like a little kid knows nothing. So no matter what you tell them, like, why is the sky blue? Oh, well, it's oxygen. Well, why? Well, because trees make it. Well, why? Well, fucking photosynthesis. Well, why? Well, oh, fuck, I don't know. And then you wind up losing your shit and running off. So, when you say the fundamentals, I mean, you know, how fundamental do we need to be? Do we need to talk about like the ancient Greeks understood that there was something about the male anatomy that generated maleness and that was pursued for literally 1,000 years until it was isolated, even before it was named and understood, and that ultimately was deemed to be testosterone. That was then manufactured in the lab in the late 20s, early 30s, depending on who you ask. The patent for that was, I think, 1933. The patent for the actual methodology of making synthetic testosterone, and then Since then, the goal of PEDs being steroids, and by the way, PEDs are basically all drugs. You can find a performance enhancement benefit on almost any drug under the right application. So momentarily, I'm narrowing it to just steroids.
Steroid.
But the goal of steroid science from that moment of we now have testosterone in a bottle. And boys and girls, by the way, that was fucking pre-World War II. This idea that like steroids are new. Fucking no. Fucking no. Okay. The patent for manufacturing testosterone was in the 30s. The we have it, we don't know what the fuck it is. That was the late 1800s. Okay. So anyway, ever since then, the goal has been to slowly bifurcate the actions of testosterone, the masculinizing and the muscularizing, if you will, into different ratios, if you will. To varying successes, some very poor and some very good. And by the way, the goal wasn't exclusively muscular. People have this deluded belief that like steroids were invented for bodybuilding. No, they were invented for medicine, and there are medical reasons why you would want a highly masculinizing steroid. For instance, a developmental defect in a child that's not masculinizing, you would fucking want that. Now, female, you absolutely would not want that. So there was reason to pursue both sides of that tree. So I mean, like that's the hyper basics. Is testosterone was kind of identified as the template that made men men and was responsible for the masculinizing and the muscularizing, and then all steroid science from there was trying to bifurcate those actions and find applications for them. Is that
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So we know that all PEDs are, I mean, all steroids are derivatives of testosterone, correct? And
um that would have been correct up until the early 90s. When you get into like the Balco era, and for instance, like the Clear, technically that was actually a progestin. So there's actually a very, very narrow but weird little off ramp that makes that statement not entirely true. But when you talk about the ones everyone knows about, all of
yeah,
your Primobolan, Masteron, Nandrolone, Trenbolone, Mint, THB, yes, they're all. And when you say derivative, that's not really fair, but they're all fundamentally the four-ringed structure that testosterone started as. Yes.
yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't seem, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes in the world of research, but it seems like pretty much all that ceased in the 70s for the
Yes,
most part.
100%. Yes. I again, and this is not meant to be sexist in the slightest. I am the furthest thing from sexist. I'm married. I have three daughters, and I actually prefer to work with female athletes over male athletes. This is not a sexist remark in the slightest, but I have often said that when the dollar input moved from anabolic steroids to birth control related steroids. Had that not happened, and it happened for a good reason, and I'm not complaining, I'm simply saying, had that not happened, and the amount of money that went into birth control stayed in anabolic steroids, we would have fantastically effective, absurdly safe steroids.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about that because like the stuff that we're using is 50 years old,
Yeah.
50-year-old plus
Yes.
technology at this point
Yes.
for
Yeah.
science.
Primobolan, Steranabol, and comically Trenbolone. Probably reverse order. Probably Primobolan, Trenbolone, and then Steranabol would be Steranabol being, I think, probably the last commercial steroid to be put on the market. That might have been like 1980. We're talking about very, very old products.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who works in pharmaceutical research. There does seem to be a rekindling of
Yes,
interest in researching these things
absolutely.
from what I
And the
understand.
comedy, and if I may be a little somewhere between sarcastic and political. One of, if not the fundamental figure that really oppressed steroids was singularly the demented floppy dick imbecile known as Joe Biden. He's the guy who stood in Congress and wagged his finger at professional fucking baseball players and said that I was pretty good at baseball and I'm pretty sure I would have played on the team if there weren't for people taking steroids. Really, really fucking Joe? And he personally put an enormous amount of leverage, political leverage, in play to demonize steroids because he was a shit athlete and he could not fucking cheerleader and he got stuck with that ugly goat faced wife of his. And that's a huge amount of why the world is the way it is. So now that he's a million years old and needs TRT, all of a sudden it's not quite as bad. So I find that tragic.
Yeah, it's interesting that baseball was the. I remember that whole. We're essentially the same age, but I remember that whole witch hunt with baseball. It was crazy.
Yeah, and even that wasn't really the true story. I was very much right in the mix of that. I don't want to make more of it than needs to be, but I was very much right in the mix of that. I just missed, as in declined, but I mean I just started actually working with and for Belco, so I was right fucking there. Um, the reality is, and this is almost always the reality with steroids, including the current steroid drought, it's always collateral damage. The reality is the problem in baseball was amphetamines, but they really didn't want to say that word out loud.
That's
And
wild.
that's why they pursued steroids so hard. It was a way to implement drug management and get rid of amphetamines because they knew full well someone was going to fucking die.
Wow, that's wild. I didn't know that.
Yes. Yes, that is 100% the case. And back in the early 80s with the WW, then F, now E, it was the same thing. They didn't give a shit about steroids. It was opioids. They had such an opioid problem because the job was just so fucking hard and damaging that, again, they were convinced someone was going to die. They didn't want somebody dying on fucking television, and so they went on this witch hunt. And steroids were a much easier, more obvious, more PR acceptable demon.
And ultimately, the guys probably would have been safer if they had used some stuff rather than
Yeah,
going down the opioid route.
yeah, 100%. But nonetheless, that's a very separate and very weird conversation. But yeah, steroids are almost always the collateral damage and rarely the actual target of ire.
I work with a handful of professional athletes. I do some nutrition for guys, but it's always wild to me. Like I see professional football, and I've worked with some guys in that area, in that arena, that how they'll throw all sorts of painkillers and crazy stuff at those guys, and then the freak out if the guys are using a little bit of GH and
Right.
testosterone.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is
You know,
very, very strange. So somehow that Vicodin is more clinically relevant than 2 to 4 to 6 IUs of pharma grade GH. Like that doesn't make a drop of sense to me. But hey,
where the GH could help with recovery and keeping these guys healthier and probably their long-term health
yeah,
versus covering up things with
yeah,
painkillers
yeah, 100%.
and getting these guys out here. Yeah, it's wild to me.
That's been my argument really since GH started. Take momentarily take bodybuilding as a separate thing because in all reality, I really think bodybuilding is very much a separate thing. But in sports, consider this. And again, I really press people to go behind me and verify the things I say. Do some of your own research. Don't just listen to me like a talking head. But you can go to, I mean, Wikipedia isn't the bastion of information, but it's got some basic timeline stuff right. you can literally look up the timeline of growth hormone, like when there was none, and then when it was extracted from cadavers, and then the first generation of synthetic, and then the second generation of synthetic, and then truly recombinant growth hormone. And you can literally track when it entered the market and what, and in what volumes. And the short answer is in volume, recombinant growth hormone, very, very early 1990s, like 1990, 92, right in there. If you then plot the age of professional athletes, it literally goes like that.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, there were zero 40-year-old professional athletes. I'm being hyperbolic. There was probably a handful, but they were a fucking punter here and an ice curler there. But in general, there were zero 40-year-old athletes. In today's world, every famous athlete you can think of is 40. Coincidence? Maybe they all just suddenly learned to train really orthopedically safe. Maybe like helmet technology got so good, but maybe they were taking the fucking growth hormone. Maybe it's that. Maybe.
I mean, you can clearly see it in bodybuilding. There
Yeah,
were no competent masters bodybuilding competitors,
correct.
and now, I mean, I just
I
I have
actually got cold. I don't mean to be a dick, but I will call bullshit because I know the man and I have a huge respect for him. Save Albert Beckles.
yeah, Albert Buck. Yeah,
I
he
don't
was
know
an
how or
anomaly.
why, but Albert is a fucking immortal, and his physique was top fucking notch,
Didn't
way into infirmity.
he won a pro show? I think at 60 years old, if I remember right.
Yeah, he was a and the craziest thing you would I think you would just assume that somebody with that level of quote longevity trained very delicate and dainty and quote safe. He did not. We're talking 150-pound flat dumbbell presses. Like he was a bad man every minute of every day for his whole career. And I have nothing but respect for that.
He's still alive, isn't he? I
I
think he's
believe
in his
so.
90s. Yeah,
I
he's in
believe
his
so.
90s.
Yeah.
Some people are just built different. They're
Yeah.
anomalous.
There's just anomalies, and he's one. Like I'm not. Yeah, I'm not claiming any secret inside knowledge. I know because I was there, and he was a badass man.
Yeah, it was wild though. Like I just got back from Masters Nationals. I had a bunch of guys competing, but just seeing, like, I've been going to bodybuilding shows for 30 years, and just the level of increase in guys over 40 that are I competed in the 50s last year, and the competition was stiff.
Yes.
That didn't exist before
Yeah.
growth hormone.
And the weird part, I mean, being as old as I am, you remember back in the 80s, teen competitors were so tough, and
Yeah.
that's seemingly gone.
Well, I mean, that could be a societal thing too.
Probably. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, I mean, very likely. But it's just very interesting how that has flipped. I mean,
Yeah.
you go back to like 1980, 88, 80, 86, 88. Like the teen nationals was like watching a fucking pro show.
Yeah. 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 It was. There's also, I mean, it's a whole other separate thing, rabbit hole you could go down, but the decline in testosterone levels in young men as well.
Yeah, there's that. But I mean, it's not as if drugs weren't in play then and there. So I honestly don't necessarily think it's that.
I
Um,
think it's more society.
I do. I agree. I actually think it might also be information overload. Like again, being my age, you probably remember uh, maybe not a time before the internet, but a time before the flood of just nonsense and the volume of nonsense. Um, originally the internet was a research tool, not
Yeah.
just anyone spouting their opinion. And finding legitimate information was challenging and usually required travel and actual dialogue. You had to actually
Yeah.
go somewhere and talk to somebody or pick up a telephone and hope they did. Um, and so I think the I don't want to say the quality, but I would certainly say the clarity of information was much superior.
Yeah, and you had to. It was interesting. I remember starting in the gym in the late '80s, early '90s. You had to earn your way
Yes,
in
yes.
like it
There was
wasn't just
definitely
handed
gatekeeping.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It wasn't
yeah.
this Amazon world of you just get a couple Bitcoin and you could just have drugs sent to your home like that. That absolutely did not happen. You had to find the person with the drugs, ingratiate yourself, show that you trained hard enough to have a reason for fucking drugs, and like it was a whole different thing.
It wasn't even just the drugs too. It was the information. The
Yeah,
guys didn't share information until they knew they could trust you and that they
agreed,
saw that you were working. And
agreed.
I, I remember I started off, I think I don't know, 16 at a pretty hardcore powerlifting gym, and the guys were brutal. I mean, they were brutal when you got in there. There was definitely a period of hazing, and you had to earn your way in,
Yes,
and you
yes,
get slapped in the back of the head if you did something wrong, and then once you proved that you could hang and were there for a while, then they would start slowly opening the gate up a little
yes,
bit and letting you know
yes.
some stuff.
Yep. I I I am very aware. Well, on kind of on one hand self-deprecating, on one hand self-aggrandizing. I'm well aware that I'm a little brighter than the average. I'm also well aware that I've worked really hard collecting the knowledge that I have. But in that same breath, I'm also aware that just by luck, if you believe in such a thing, um, I had the opportunity to be around some really, really special people very early. And again, as you said, sort of ingratiate myself and have a platform in which to start that many people would just did not. You know,
Yeah, I definitely have lucked into some good people over the years. I mean, that's part of it too. But now there's just such a flood of information
yeah,
out there, and so much of it's bad. And I almost feel bad for some of the younger guys
I
because it's
agree.
really hard for them to discern what's good and what's not, because it's usually the guy that screams the loudest that gets the most attention.
Yeah. And also unfortunately, I think, like most things, people gravitate, I don't want to say to what they want to hear, but people have tastes and they tend
Yeah.
to gravitate toward whatever kind of macabre meets their taste. And unfortunately, then that's the information that they're given, and it may not necessarily be appropriate to them. Even if it's appropriate to the person speaking, it may not be necessarily a person appropriate to the person it's being delivered to.
And there's also, I mean, the computer scientist in me, but the way the algorithms on social media work, it feeds you more of the stuff that you engage with. So
Correct.
if you
Right. It's
engage
sort of
with,
self bias generating. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it is literally engineered to be confirmation bias because that's what keeps you engaged, and so they can sell more ads and
Yeah,
keep you on the platform.
for sure. For sure. Um,
And I think that, if I were to give a young guy a piece of advice, I would say to be acutely aware of that and to
yeah.
seek out other stuff.
Yeah. I think if I had to give advice, well, starting with training, because that kind of a little bit where we started, I would say that, again, pick something that appeals to you,
Yep.
commit to it. I think one of, if not the biggest evil right now is uh, people expecting something to work much quicker than it possibly can, and then abandoning it, moving on to the next thing, thinking they didn't make a good choice.
Yeah.
I think that whatever it is you commit to, I think a year is a sensible filtering duration. Like if you're not doing it for a year, you haven't learned the ins and outs of it. You really you aren't driving that car well yet to even decide if that's the car to keep.
There was the story with Ronnie Coleman. I had heard that Brian Dobson gave him a training program when he came into Metroflex, and Ronnie used that same one for his entire career.
Yeah, I've heard something very, very similar. I don't necessarily know how true it is, but
Yeah.
probably because I mean, again, so, certain things are just anecdotally verifiable. Like you can look at his DVD series, and there isn't an enormous amount of difference from one to the other. Like he trained things twice a week, once with barbells, once with dumbbells. Front squats one week or one workout and back squats the next week. Like it looks pretty fucking similar decade over decade. So yeah,
But
I buy that.
and it's not like Metroflex had a ton of equipment for variability anyway. It was pretty
Yeah.
limited in what.
Well, that again, I think largely, and I hope I'm not making a false assumption here, but I think largely your interest and specialization is bodybuilding. I think you referenced you do work with some football players and things, but I think bodybuilding is kind of where you live.
Yeah, I'm a
Yeah,
bodybuilding nerd for sure.
yeah.
But I was an athlete too. I played basketball when I was younger, so I do enjoy sports. I did some
Uh,
powerlifting, not very
on a
well,
on a
but
professional level is really what I meant. And
yeah,
my point is on a professional level, bodybuilding is by far my smallest interest and also revenue. Like I really do more stuff in other sports. An awful lot of it unpublicized and unspoken for reasons. Um,
I'm
and
aware.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing is this whole like concept of variability really only resides in bodybuilding. Like most sports, you do the same shit for 30 years.
Yeah.
Like this idea of like, oh, I gotta change it up. Like, what are you gonna speed skate on your fucking hands? No, you're gonna fucking put the skates on and you're gonna skate. Like, there's this idea that variability is necessary for progress is really just not relevant, or even demonstrably true. Um, Maybe in bodybuilding because it's such an unsport, but certainly in sports, like you do pretty much what you do, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, and that's always what's kind of, I hate to pull it back to bodybuilding, but that's always been something that drove me nuts as guys tend to overcomplicate it.
Yeah,
And it's like like you look at any other sport, basketball, for example, would is kind of where my background is. Guys
sure.
specialize in
Yeah,
training for their sport, and they just repeat the same shit over and over and over and progressively get better at it.
yep. And the
Really
only
what
time
it
they would
boils down
change
to.
if they had a repetitive use injury or some dynamic on the court changed.
Right.
But yeah,
I mean, like a football player wouldn't go out and start suddenly training like a soccer player or table tennis or whatever. They specialize in their sport, and even within football, there's specialization.
100%. An outside linebacker is not going to train the same as a center or a nose guard. Yep, of course. And why would they? They have different job descriptions.
Yeah, that's why I find football so fascinating because there's so many. There's strength, there's speed,
Yep,
and so many different. Whereas basketball, it's essentially the same skill sets on the court, but football is really. There's so many different subspecializations of
yep.
football. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and football's I don't spend a lot of time in the world of football, but just mostly because I actually just don't like it as a sport. It doesn't entertain me, so I'm not gravitated to it. But football shares an interesting thing with track and field, which does super interest me and I do specialize in. And one of the most valuable traits in American football is something that's probably literally unknown to bodybuilders, and that is a subset of fitness called repeatability. It's not so much how strong are you or how fit are you, but how many times can you perform exactly like that in a row?
Yeah.
That ability to repeatably, reliably perform at that level because there's play after play after play after play. That is a really unique characteristic. And again, bodybuilders like just don't have that. They don't why they train almost for the opposite of that. Like they do
Yeah.
every set to failure and just consistently get worse.
Yeah, no, that is true. There is also it seems to be a lot of crossover from track and field to football.
Yeah. Yes. For a number of reasons, some of them good, some of them bad. The good is there are some similarities, and then the bad is university coaching is, at least in America, is just absolute fucking garbage. And so the coaching staff just kind of intermingle and mill around, and you get a lot of just crossover simply because nobody really has a home or a brain. Um,
I don't know a ton about track and field. Never really was my thing, but it's amazing athletes
yeah,
and just some crazy stuff that goes
yeah,
on in track and field.
yes. I find track and field one of the highest, if not perhaps I even do value it as the highest demonstration of human capabilities. If you really stop and think about a human accelerating to more than 10 meters per second linearly, like that's really fucking staggering. You hear these powerlifters talk about, I'm explosive, I'm doing a speed day, and they're pulling a deadlift at fucking a half a meter a second, maybe not even. They're squatting. At, it takes 3 and 4 seconds to lock out a squat, and they moved perhaps a meter. Whereas you got guys like Ben Johnson that were accelerating from 0 to 10 meters per second in 3 footfalls. Like what the fuck?
Yeah, Ben Johnson's crazy. I was I went to an NFL training facility one time, and there was a guy. I can't remember his name. He was a cornerback, but also a track and field guy, and he was challenging people. There was some guys in the audience talking about how fast they were, and he was challenging guys to race 40-yard dashes running backwards. He was beating guys off the street running backwards,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
which
So I
was
mean, again, track and field carryover. Weird little thing. Powerlifting is only 50 something years old. Like the first world championship was 1971.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
wild.
I don't actually say this very often because it just sounds too weird and coincidental. The very first World Powerlifting Championship was held in York, Pennsylvania. Lifting started at 9 a.m. November 6th, 1971. Weirdly, coincidentally, possibly even serendipitously, that is the exact moment that I was born.
That's crazy.
In Camp Lejeune, I was born at exactly the same time as literally the birth of powerlifting, and was the moment of my birth. It's super weird, but also super true and super verifiable, fuckers. But anyway, where I was going with that is a guy named George Friend was an Olympic hammer thrower. He was a track and not a powerlifter. He was a track and field guy, and just on a fucking goof put on fucking squat shoes and ace bandages on his knees and squatted 800 at 220.
Holy crap. That is
So
wild.
yeah,
Yeah, some people are just gifted. It seems like I really kind of gotten fascinated with strongman. They seem to be sort of the crossover between powerlifting and track and field. It's
absolutely.
those guys are impressive.
Yes. And yes, on so many levels. Like the sheer feat, but the sheer feats, but the unfortunate, unfortunately, it depends how you look at it. Um, it is like basketball becomes such a genetic subset.
Yeah,
They're just really, really unique individuals that then have to train and eat and do all these things. But just the number of people of that size with any measure of structural integrity and coordination, that's a small subset of humanity.
and they all seem to be Scandinavian.
Uh, Large, yeah, I don't know. You go back to the Kazmaier days, not so much. Puchanowski reigned supreme, although Strongman was a little
Yeah.
different during that era. It was a little more fitness driven, a little less absolute strength. Um, little self serving to say it, but my wife is um, top 10, top five in the US. And
Oh, that's awesome.
she's of Welsh extraction.
Well, the Scandinavians were all throughout that
Yeah,
region,
yeah,
the
fair, fair.
Vikings, anyway.
Yeah,
So,
she's comically. I don't know if we've ever actually met, but camera doesn't do me justice in terms of how fucking small a person I am. I'm a little tiny fucker. Uh, I'm
I saw
100.
you at Masters Nationals last year. I meant to say
Okay,
hi, but I was so wrapped
okay,
up in
yeah,
what was going on.
sure. I'm sure we both were. Yeah, I'm 5'4", maybe five, maybe 5'5". Maybe the height of my life, I was 5'5". I think I currently weigh like 135 or something, 130 or 230 rather. Oh, sorry. Um,
So
my
you look
first
a lot bigger than 135.
my first instinct is to speak in metric. That's why I was like I'm like 164 centimeters and 105 kilos, but that to most people doesn't mean anything. So yeah, I'm like whatever 5'5", 235, something like that. My wife is 6 foot 265.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, she's bigger than me.
yeah, she is a big girl. I have her hand tattooed on my arm, and it's sincerely much bigger than my shoulder. Um, she could
That's wild.
actually she could palm an NBA basketball.
Humans are
Yeah.
fascinating. I'm genetically a tall, thin guy. I've had to fight and scrape to get any size on me. My default mode, my body just wants to go back to being 185 pounds and 6'2".
Okay. We've never talked about this, but I'm just going to say, just based on that remark, I'm going to say that nandrolone and anadrol were probably your best friends in your developmental window.
Yeah, they worked well when I was younger. I can't tolerate nandrolone anymore for some reason. It just doesn't agree with me. I get really bad anxiety when I'm on nandrolone, but
Yep.
yeah, nandrolone and anadrol did work very well.
Yep. That again, people really need to go back and like learn about people like Dan Duchesne and Paul Morrison, and then they all made that remark. Oh, they all made that remark at different points in their careers at different times. They all made that remark that the fuller, rounder, more aggressive drugs get you there, but then sooner or later you're going to have to default to less voluminous, sort of more substantial was often a word that they used, or what was the other? Dan had another word he would use. Um, basically, moving toward the Pribal Masteron, you Winstrol type, sort of solidifying that volume.
Yeah, I've graduated, anymore it's just test, primo, and GH is
Yeah,
kind of
and
where I live.
and I think that's kind of almost by default the necessary evolution of things.
Yeah, but I when I was younger, yeah, it was definitely Deca and Anadrol were my go-tos.
Yeah,
They put size on me like nothing else.
yeah. Just out of curiosity, how liberal or not were you with testosterone use through your career?
Kind of my upper limit. I'm an idiot, and I like to find out where I can go to. But 1,500 is probably about as high as I could ever go without major issues. I kind of settled in around 1,000 milligrams is kind of where I found to be my sweet spot.
Fair enough. That considerably more than I would probably suggest,
750
but
maybe.
I don't disbelieve you in the slightest.
Yeah, my typical off season when I was I had a major growth spurt in my 40s, which was kind of anomalous. But I 750 test and 600 primo were kind of where I lived in my off
Yeah.
season.
Again, I super don't disbelieve that. Um, Universally, what I find is the people. Well, what I find, I'm interpreting, I'm suspecting. Like I'm do I have no godlike powers to know exactly what's going on? But my experience leads me to the assumption that the people that can consistently tolerate those 1,000 to 2,000 milligram testosterone values are one of two subsets or both. They're either people that just really don't convert androgens to estrogens very well, aka aromatize. Such people exist. Or people that are using something like Primobolan or Masteron, and they get an exaggerated anti-estrogen effect from those,
Yeah.
and therefore they can do that. I think
Yeah.
most people don't have those two superpowers, and therefore their sensible upper limit for testosterone is considerably lower.
Yeah, and I should caveat that I cannot run testosterone that high alone.
Well, there you go. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I say testosterone by itself. I mean, honestly, I get much above 300 milligrams. I start having aromatization
yeah,
issues. So
yeah.
I need primobolan with it to balance that out.
Comedically, both Primobolan and Masteron really never gave me particularly much estrogen suppression. Um, Now, I never went crazy with the testosterone, like ever. I think maybe 600 milligrams might be the most I ever used. Most of my career, it was more like 300. But even at that value, my estrogen was well above the reference range. Um, Sometimes even like 200.
Yeah, I tend to be a high aromatizer.
Yeah.
It's been interesting since I really haven't trained in 3 or 4 months. I had a bicep tendon tear. I had to have that repaired. Just wear and tear over the years, but essentially, like my default state was to be skinny, but like now at an older age, like I hold 240, 250
Yeah.
just on TRT.
Yeah.
you know,
Homeostasis. Yeah.
that's my new homeostasis now. It's my set point. I run 150, 200 milligrams a test, and I can stay there even without training.
Yeah. And, it's funny because that kind of, I don't know if it's a segue you meant, but it's a segue that I find in that I would like to use as an opportunity. I hear a lot of that, kind of these, I won't use a name, but you can insert almost any name. This 50, 40 to 60-year old, former pro, just like, I don't understand these young people. Like, I can look like this on 500 milligrams, and I'm
I
like,
hate that.
yeah, I'm like, yes, but that has nothing to do with how you got there. You're not lying, but I don't know. Are you so dumb you don't know what you did in the past, or are you intentionally misrepresenting
Yeah.
that? Um, I'll give you a similar but different example of that. And this person was definitely not dumb. Was very much a mentor to me and somebody I spent a lot of time with and had a very high level of respect for. But we had more than a handful of conversations that bordered on arguments about this very topic. And that was Dr. Fred Hatfield. He was always writing a book about the latest, greatest way to train. And he was, and I know because I was there, he was not lying. Like, for instance, compensatory acceleration. Like, that is truly the thing that moved his squat from 900 pounds to 1,000 pounds. That is not inaccurate. That is absolutely true. But he was selling it as if it was this like magical thing that everyone needed to do. And I'm like, no one that buys this book squats 900 pounds. No people do that. Like, the book you need to write is for what took you from 300 pounds to 600 pounds, because that's the journey that everyone buying a book is looking for.
I remember reading his hardcore bodybuilding book. I
Oh,
had to
yeah.
look it up. Yeah, I remember. I ordered it out of the back of a magazine.
And a great book, and one I would recommend everyone read. By the way, there's two versions of that. That was then later republished under Titan Sports when he worked for the WWF. Or during that, what was it? The WBF, the Bodybuilding Federation. That same book was republished with some minor changes. I'd recommend people buy both of those versions.
Yeah, I remember that. I bought Dan Duchesne's book out of the back of a magazine too. Remember,
You can't go wrong with Dan material. I mean, Body Opus is probably the most seminal piece of material in modern bodybuilding.
read all of them.
Yeah,
Excellent books. Still have them on my shelf. Yeah,
yeah,
Hatfield. But yeah, it's wild to see. It's funny. You talk about that. That frustrates the fuck out of me too. These guys don't talk about what it took to get there.
yeah.
And you usually you have, especially if you're a smaller guy, you have to press the gas pedal down at some point.
Yeah, it's funny. I on that topic, like I very rarely even look at, much less interact with comments on anything. Actually, I just closed Facebook. I don't even fucking dick with Facebook anymore. Instagram's kind of the only thing I even have going as a commercial enterprise. And just in case you're interested, folks, I don't fucking look at the comments. I don't. I just don't. I don't
But
care.
your
I
mental health is better off
you
for
you
it.
you you really have to understand how much I don't care. I care just enough to post the material, and even that's fucking waning. So just know. But for some reason, I remember, actually it was my assistant pointed out a comment to me. That's why I remember it. I did a seminar in the UK, and I was talking about my personal journey to an 800-pound squat. So I squatted 800 pounds, and somebody asked me like, "What was your drug use for that?" And I laid it out exactly, and it was obscenely simple. I literally was taking 300 milligrams of testosterone, and I linearly added Masteron week over week up to 4 grams. I'm not proud of that. I'm not. It's not like that was a goal. It's simply that's how much it took to get there. It wasn't like I set out to find out how much Masteron I could take or whatever. It's just every week there was more weight on the bar, and every week I felt like I was going to fucking die. So I needed more anabolic stimulus to fucking survive to the next workout. And that's how it went. And then after I squatted the 800, the dose came way the fuck back down because I wasn't doing that anymore. And some fucking chuckle dick in the comments was like, "It does not take 4 grams to squat 800." And I actually interacted with that person, and I was like, I don't disbelieve that you squatted 800 pounds with less than 4 grams. But for you to say that would be the same as telling my wife, "Oh, it absolutely doesn't take 10 chemotherapy sessions to defeat cervical cancer." Like that's ridiculous. Like most people do it in 6. Like that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It takes how much it fucking takes. That's it. That's the answer. The option is death. You fucking dimwit. The fuck's wrong with you?
Yeah, people are stupid, man.
I mean, that's not even stupid, but just self awareness and ignorance. That's a level that exceeds even my expectations. And I think everyone's shit. Like, that's just really. Like, can you imagine that? Like, if the medical community actually worked that way, like, "Oh, you have bronchitis. Here's your penicillin. You come back coughing a couple weeks later, and they're like, "Oh no, we gave you your shit. You're on your own. Fuck off." Like, really? Does anybody think it works that way? Ever?
Nope.
What the fuck?
Yeah, there's some dimwits on social media, that's for sure.
Oh my god! I don't know why. I don't know why, but that particular one sticks with me, and it wasn't even because it was like about me. It was just like the level of just the level of stupid to talk yourself into that loop. Like I just, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it takes what it takes. That is a that is exactly true.
Right. I mean, and if you're a lucky asshole and you super respond, like, I mean, like, fantastic. Like, I love that. But to denigrate someone else because it took more, like I passed most of my university exams without studying. But for me to like make fun of the people that had to fucking study, that's dumb. Like, again, it's just stupid. It's just stupid.
People, I don't know what this obsession is, but people love to point to outliers as examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, this guy did that. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not that fucking guy.
Yeah. And it's also funny because the exact opposite also applies too. Is people will always do the like, well, but Ronnie Coleman was a freak. Like, really? First of all, has anyone seen pictures of him pre-Olympia run? Not that fucking freaky. And two, does anybody mention the fuck that he was up before the sun every day making oatmeal and fucking grits and whatever the fuck he was doing? And that, you know, every night when you were fucking jerking off playing Xbox, he was on the fucking stair mill. Like, nobody mentions that shit. It's just, oh, he was a freak. He's a fucking freaky, dedicated, grinding motherfucker is what he was.
Yeah, I mean, there is that aspect of it too. There are many variables in that equation. That is for sure.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah,
did he have some physiological quirks? Actually, yes. The answer to that is yes. But he also earned every goddamn trophy and injury that he's got.
well, he is the example of when potential meets hard work.
100%. There, yes. Yes.
I go back to basketball. Michael Jordan would be that example for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And even the Larry Bird, like he was, he was gifted, but I don't know if anyone worked harder at their craft.
Believe me, I played a lot of basketball over the years. There are a lot of 6'8" guys playing on public courts that never did anything.
Yep. 100%. 100%.
So you have to actually take those gifts and do something with them.
Yep.
I'm sure in the world you came from, you've met a lot of very smart people that didn't do a damn thing with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, in some ways, I almost feel that way about myself. There are no, I'm not joking. No, I'm not joking. I feel, again, I don't want to sound wildly full of myself, but I often wonder if I applied my intellect to a thing of high enough value to warrant it. Making a handful of assholes slightly better bodybuilders. I wonder if that's really the outlet for an intellect that could have maybe done something a bit grander. I don't know.
Well, it's your journey, that's for sure. Broderick, I appreciate you coming on, man. I got to wrap this up. Thank you very much. You're entertaining and informational as always. I really appreciate you. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to get in contact with you?
People can find a website. Well, first of all, everything we have, the one great piece of useful advice I got in business that I actually listened to was branding. So everything we are is at Team Evil GSP. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and website, Team Evil GSP. You can find us. So there's that. And then the whole reach me, that's a shady thing. You're welcome to join the member site. You're welcome to absorb as much information as you like. But actually getting to and in front of me, that's probably a trickier road because I'm at a stage in my life and my career where I do very, very, very little one-on-one coaching just because I don't want to.
Well, folks, buy the sticky notes. I love your sticky notes series. They're great, man.
There's on that front. There's a couple more coming, and a couple I think you actually really will appreciate. I'll get you advanced copies as soon as they're wrapped up.
Yeah, I've bought all of them. I love it. It's fantastic.
I sincerely I appreciate that. It's nice to know every once in a while that one, people are paying attention, and two, that people who are worthy of having an opinion offer it and it's positive. So I do
I
do
think
sincerely appreciate that.
the information is presented in a succinct and easy to understand format, and it's excellent on top of it. All right, thank you very much.